Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline here in our lovely studio as always, and with Matt Offenbacher here. If you've never listened before, welcome. And for those who've listened several times, welcome back.
Yes.
Feels good to be back. I took a little bit of a hiatus, and man, I come back. We got a fancy new table and chairs, and it doesn't get much better than this.
Well, adding to your family, I would say, is maybe a little better, which is why Justin was out. So
Yeah.
if you're a loyal listener, send him a congratulations, because that's exciting. And I'm studying. I don't see like huge bags under his eyes, so I think he got a little rest. But how are you feeling?
Been pretty good. It's for anyone out there who remembers going through the baby stage, it's just a lot of work, a lot of shuffling, trying to help. If you're a family who decides to commit to sleeping in the same room with the baby and your spouse, then you lack a little sleep. But kind of everyone's happy and healthy, which is the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think your body naturally forces you to forget the first few months of having a baby, because all the things we sort of were running through between my wife and I leading up to this was this is gonna be tough and that's gonna be tough. But then as my wife's trying to feed, and it's that's all she can do, because anytime she gets up, the baby starts crying because she wants to feed again. It's oh, that's right, I really can't go and do much right now because I'm stuck. So besides that, everything's been good. And the sleep thing is interesting. I have kind of all these sleep hack things that I try and do to maximize the quality of sleep relative to the short hours of sleep. And so I think that's part of it. It might be marginal on the benefit, but I feel like I'm doing everything to maximize the short amount of sleep that I'm getting. So
That's wise.
yeah, trying to. But anyway, that's you've gone through it, and a lot of folks have. And so you just kind of bite down and power through. But I'm happy to be back. It's good to be back at work. You stay away for too long, you might realize that they don't need you anymore. So I didn't want to stay away for too long, because the show must go on, and here we are, haven't skipped a beat. I feel like we hadn't really skipped any episodes, right? Because we loaded up.
No, we loaded up in anticipation. So but you may see us catching up a little bit with similar clothing if you're watching this in the video periodically, as we try and get a few more in the cache. But I thought we'd ease back into it for you and just do a little basic discussion on pH today. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, again, I think it's good. And it's one of those where, especially when you drill with water-based mud, there's a lot of folks who remember going to mud school and think they remember exactly everything about pH, how to run it, what levels to be at, what, how to test for it properly. And then that leads into alkalinities. But pH in itself, it's, especially when drilling with water-based mud, it's one of the key, it's the key properties that you run, right? Because it can affect a lot of different things. I think it'd be good to kind of break down what pH is and then how it affects drilling fluids, Matt. So let's kick it off, man. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, let's go. What is pH? What does it stand for, and what's its sort of basic explanation?
Well, technically, no one's really sure what pH stands for, because the guy that defined it was sort of scratching his notes. So there is much debate as to what it actually stands for, ironically enough, but we're committed. But in essence, it describes how alkaline, how acidic or basic something is. And how you would describe this, more broadly is, think of your concentration of hydrogen ions and concentration of hydroxide ions. And so the way I like to illustrate this is H+, when we think of acids, hydrochloric acid, HCl, sulfuric acid, H2SO4. So it's got those hydrogens there, and that's what makes it acidic. But when we go more basic, think about caustic soda, CaOH, right?
Okay.
Or sodium, NaOH, I'm sorry. And then lime, calcium hydroxide. right?
Right.
CaOH2. So like OH. So we get more basic, right? Um, and then H2O, perfectly neutral. I've got the H and the OH stuck together, H2O, right?
Gotcha.
Um, and so on that scale of pH, it's actually a logarithmic scale. So when you go from 7 to 8, it's an order of magnitude more OHs or hydroxyls, as you might call them. As you go more acidic, if you go from a 6 to a 5, that's an order of magnitude more hydrogens. So that scale, like, it's pretty extreme to go from one to the other. And we measure that with our water-based fluids. Commonly you might use strips, and there's like a color bar chart. You dip the strip in, you match it up, get a reading, or you might use a glass electrode meter like we have in the lab. It just requires some calibration and maintenance and that kind of thing. Where even if you have that in the field, you want strips to make sure everything is as it should be. But that should give you a reasonable idea of where your pH is.
Gotcha.
So that's the scale, and then, different mud systems require a different pH.
Right. Well, let's start with the most basic. Just on like a general fluid. Let's talk about spud mud, and then we'll move on from there into something a little bit more complex.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of we overlook, like, normally, without getting too far ahead of our outline here. I keep it above 9. That'll mitigate corrosion. But when we talk about, like, really reactive formations, especially in with your spud mud, real shallow, you actually want to keep your pH closer to neutral. And the reason is that you can actually activate and disperse those reactive clays, actually, make your whole situations worse, your gumbo situation worse, because if you're too alkaline, you have too many of those OHs, it actually increases more the negative sites on the clay and creates more problems for you.
Right.
So spud mud, we don't actually start throwing in a lot of that stuff. And the example I try and use as far as what can happen with those reactive clays is, I don't know if you've ever done this, but you're trying to clear lines. Have you ever made like a caustic pill and pumped it
Yeah.
through?
Well, I don't know if it was about clearing the lines, but it was sort of to help kind of like break up and do almost like a caustic pill.
Yeah.
If you're getting it was offshore getting our sort of BHA to clear up. But anyway, not to clear lines, but it makes sense conceptually. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes we'd circulate them around to break stuff free before we cleaned everything. Um, so that's just sort of an example. Um, but then we would move into like our more conventional systems and kind of jumping back to that, get the pH up above 9 to mitigate corrosion. But that's also where, a lot of our mud systems like to play in as far as where the products work best. Xanthan gum and some of those other, polymers and that kind of thing. You'd actually want to be in that neighborhood for sort of their best performance. It would be, I don't know, between 9 and 10.5, I would say, is sort of the most common range
Right.
for most water-based muds.
Gotcha. What about a lot of times, and especially the sort of the old school hands where we used black water and sort of like dispersed systems. Why do you typically need something a little in the higher range?
Yeah, so for black water, things like, lignosulfonate aren't soluble at a normal pH. And so what you'll do to solubilize them is you'll create what you call black water. So you'll take your caustic, you'll get the pH, 10.5 or a little higher than that. And that way you can get your lignosulfonate solubilized, and then you'll bleed it into the active system. And you're going to end up with a net higher pH on that system. It won't be as high as the water that you made, but it's going to facilitate adding it in.
Right.
So, there's, that's just an example of, wanting to run your pH higher, at least for particular additives.
Mm-hmm. And then let's say, something else that can really jack with your pH. And if you're drilling with water-based mud, you've had to go through this, but drilling through cement, especially if you've got green cement, how does that affect your system?
It's, I mean, because cement is silicate, same thing with silicate drilling fluids, they're soluble at a very high pH. And so they can wreak havoc, just by way of they'll start breaking down a lot of your other drilling fluid additives. And in fact, there are certain additives that will actually, degrade into something more basic. Like if you have an amine or like PHPA, something that has those amine groups and you effectively burn it up, you can release the free ammonia, which creates other problems on the rig that can be a bit aggravating.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've seen a couple of situations. This was, back in the day offshore. We were trying to cut and pull some casing, do some other things, and they were like, "We'll just use the water-based mud we have." And it was a high-performance water-based mud, so it had a high concentration of amine. And they just, they didn't care what fluid it was because they were cutting all this casing. Well, there was green cement down there, and sure enough, it started creating a bunch of problems with ammonia at the rig floor and that kind of thing. So less of that. But that's when you end up in those really high ranges you don't want to be in, and you're kind of fighting to bring it down.
Right. And something else to note, in high pH, I remember being, again, on a jack up, and we had a system that was a polymer system, and they wanted to, flip it over to a dispersed. And so instead of sort of rebuilding, dumping it, they said, well, just jack the pH up, burn off all the polymer and rebuild it. And so I don't think that's common practice, but for some reason, that's what we did. This was several years ago, but I remember just hauling in like a full pallet into the sort of the pit room, which was, it was, looking back at it, there was probably a much better way to do it. But me and I think the pit hand were like hand bombing caustic over the grating to burn off all this polymer. And yeah, it stunk and it was terrible. And it started boiling because it was so hot and very dangerous. Don't recommend that at all, especially in like an enclosed environment like that. But yeah, I mean, you get the pH high enough, you can basically burn off anything. It gets extremely hot. So just from a safety perspective, you have to be extremely careful if you're working with high pH systems.
Yes, and I mean, that's why, the caustic barrel, if you're adding caustic, is so important because, to your point, yeah, it's an exothermic reaction. I've been involved. We had to mix KOH with a coolant. I mean, this was years ago, and it was an enclosed pit room, and this was like offshore Qatar. Like, it was probably 130 degrees in that room, and everybody was in Tyvek suits. Like, we had to get everybody rotated out to hydrate, and like we found a way to do it, but it just it begged the question of, is there a better way to do this on land and then send it out? Yeah. So proceed with caution. But I thought of probably one of the big reasons in water-based mud that we really break this down as we get into H2S and how high a pH is high enough. And I mean, in the oil field mindset, if a little is good, a lot is better. How we can actually create more problems for ourselves out of fear of encountering H2S,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And so I guess kind of breaking down what you call ionic species, where H2S is the thing we don't want, right? I got 2 hydrogens and I got a sulfur. And remember, on the pH scale, as I move to the right, as I become more alkaline, I start losing those hydrogens, right?
Yeah.
So I go from H2S to HS minus. And then I take away enough hydrogen, so I'm way, way over on the alkaline side, where my H's were pulled into H2O. So I've got a bunch of OH minus to the right, and now I'm at S minus. So that happens above about a pH of 10.5. And let us not forget the scale is logarithmic. So most people say, okay, 11, 11.5, like there's no available H2S. An important thing to remember is this is a temporary measure because it is reversible. If you drop your pH, guess what? You get those hydrogens back and that ionic species goes back to H2S, and you have the same serious concerns you would have with H2S on the rig. So, yes, this is a good practice measure, but scavengers, something that will bind up that H2S, weighting up, like stop it from flowing, all those things are just as important in this process.
Right.
But what we find is folks say, okay, if they tell me 11, I need some margin here. And I'm going to repeat it again, pH is a logarithmic scale. But occasionally we find ourselves in a position where people are really wanting to run the pH up to 12, 12.5. And that starts to create other risks and other issues at the rig. And that's kind of the, maybe the takeaway of this conversation, at least in the context of how we discuss pH today, is you get the pH up above 12, one, you really do start possibly creating formation issues and cutting. So if you're trying to drill a head, you're interacting with those clays in a different way.
Right.
The other thing is elastomers. My experience has been with like valve seats and like surface crap on the rig. Usually,
Yeah.
you'll start noticing leaks and stuff will be breaking out. And this is one reason people hated silicates is they're awesome as far as cost, environmental. They're super inhibitive, but you run such a high pH natively, and then everybody gets mad because of everything that breaks and everything you have to fix that you get one well in and people are like, dude, not again. Like,
Yeah, no, that it's tough on the rig, and especially if that stuff dries and isn't like properly washed off after you make a trip or doing things. It's you gotta kind of add some extra measures if you're working around silicates.
yeah, and
Which
that
is
high pH affects skin. I mean,
yeah,
there's other reasons to not want to go that hot if you can avoid it. I mean, we're using this caustic barrel, which is effectively giving you something that's a pH of 14. I mean, yes, it's logarithmic. It's 2 orders of magnitude down, but a pH of 12 is pretty hot.
yeah,
And so, that I think you've got to balance the practical measure of mitigating against H2S, which is something that should always be taken very seriously, with how far do I need to go before I start creating other problems that I've sort of self-inflicted out of fear of, another situation.
right.
Um,
Can you? Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was gonna say, before we continue, unless there was anything to add to the H2S piece of it, but can you just briefly touch on, and we've done corrosion episodes, but can you briefly touch on sort of the high level reason as to why a higher pH actually helps mitigate corrosion? Because that's something I just want to clear up in case someone was sort of still scratching their head.
Right. Well, I think from an acid-based perspective, if you're more acidic, you're going to draw iron into solution, right? And you start creating that path, the circuit as we describe it, for iron to move and be converted from iron and steel to iron oxide, and you get that pathway running. So that's lower pH, acidic. You're more likely to have, especially with carbon steel, potential corrosion issues.
Right.
So
Okay. Perfect. I mean, yeah. And then you could dive deeper. And again, we did a corrosion episode. I just wanted to touch on that before we move ahead into talk a little bit about carbonates and bicarbonates as it relates to the sort of alkalinities and pH.
Sure, I think here, we've talked about pH versus alkalinity, and alkalinity is sort of like the buffering capacity of something, right? So like sometimes you add acid or something acidic or something, and like the pH doesn't go down right away. And it's normally because there's something else there that's tying it up. And this is where, we run our alkalinities to determine, is our PF and our MF and what is our, what are those relationships? Like, where is it buffering?
Yeah.
But that's all across a pH range, and we're still focused on those ionic species, right? So, carbonic acid, HCO3, and or H2CO3, and then HCO3 for bicarbonate, and then CO3 2- or whatever to the far right as I take away those hydrogens, right? So I'm in this like acidic corrosive gas range, and then I start working my way over. And so understanding I'm taking away hydrogens, like that's the goal, to get over to the right. Like that's why we mess with our pH.
Right.
But moving our pH around also, we need to sort of understand what unintended consequences could occur because of that. As far as what my contaminant is, how does it affect the fluid? If it's one versus the other, how do I want to raise my pH? Do I need to keep my pH? Am I trying to keep it relatively constant? Do I not care? So like carbonates and bicarbonates, we have a whole other episode on that. But from a pH perspective, I start out with carbonic acid, moving my way to the right, the same way that like H2S is this acidic material. I take away the hydrogens and I get all the way over to the right, and I no longer have that acidic corrosive gas. My ionic species has changed.
Gotcha.
So
Perfect. No, that's Again, that's probably a deeper dive for folks out there, especially if you're a mud engineer, you may have learned a lot of this in mud school, but for the purpose of running mud, a lot of times you get your mud program, you've got the range that you're supposed to be in, you've got your product or two that you're using to adjust pH, and normally you don't have any issues, but I think it's good to sometimes have a deeper understanding or at least have some reference if you really want to dive into it, because you do get some company representatives or maybe some customers or even folks within your company that sort of challenge a pH range that make you scratch your head or want to run something a little different. So hopefully this helps clear that up and maybe gives a better understanding, Matt. So what would you say, just sort of generally speaking, are the key takeaways for folks out there?
And I think understanding pH as the parameter, right? Because like you said, you may get this recommendation and it's, well, so and so has always been running this mud system forever, wherever they're from. And so, like, let's put it in context because it might be a good suggestion, or it might be, well, actually, we only do that with these types of mud systems.
Yeah.
And then I think the other part of it is, I think particularly what we see with H2S is there's this mindset of, I got to get the pH up as high as I can. And there's a real risk of doing more harm than good when you're trying to mitigate that risk if you go too crazy.
Yeah.
So we just want to be practical and understand sort of where we are in the midst of all that. And once you get up in those really high pH ranges, you can start creating other problems, both downhole and, with the rig equipment. And it doesn't have to be this way, Justin. So.
Right. It can be a lot simpler. Hopefully everyone's on the same page now. And man, the best thing you could do is to send this and share this with some folks out there, especially who are in the drilling fluid space. Matt, I don't have any other questions. You wrapped it up nicely, but any closing last words for folks out there? Maybe it's any upcoming events, mud schools, anything worth mentioning out there now that we're kind of wrapping up summer and heading into the fall, right?
Well, I will say this. One of our customers, we did a bunch of well site representatives. We did a one-day school, did a kind of crew change, right? So did one day and one the following day. And it was just really, it's always a learning experience for me, but it was really helpful. Most of the time we talk to office people. It was pretty cool to deal with them. And we've got another round of those coming up for the same customer.
Great.
And so, it just really helps me understand where people are coming from and think of ways where maybe we can be more helpful.
Yeah.
So I was grateful for that. I'm excited about that. And it looks like it's going to be a very busy fall as usual. So hopefully busy in the right ways.
Excellent. Well, appreciate that. And for everyone listening, thanks for subscribing, listening, and sharing. If you could connect with us on LinkedIn if you have any questions, thoughts for a show, if you'd like us to elaborate on any sort of topics or concepts that we've talked about recently, let us know. Look us up on again, the website, ton of information on there. And until next time, folks, cheers. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.